The stars had always seemed peaceful to Commander Daniel Carter. He stood on the observation deck of the orbital station above Earth, watching the distant lights that humanity had only begun to explore. 3 star systems now belonged to his people, 3 tiny dots in a galaxy that stretched beyond imagination. It was not much, but it was theirs. The piece ended with a single transmission. Carter was reviewing supply manifests when his communication officer, a young woman named Hannah Price, called him to the command center. Her face was pale, her hands were shaking. She said nothing as she played the message on the main screen. The face that appeared was not human. It belonged to a Vorath, one of the ancient species that ruled the galaxy. The creature had gray skin, stretched tight over a skull that seemed too large for its body. Its eyes were black and empty, like holes cut into space itself. When it spoke, the translator rendered its words in a cold, mechanical voice. The Vorath Empire had watched humanity spread across the stars. They had tolerated this expansion because humans were small and weak and irrelevant. But now humanity had claimed territory in the Kepler Belt, a region rich with minerals that the Empire desired. This was unacceptable. Humanity had 30 standard days to surrender all claims to the belt and submit to imperial authority. Failure to comply would result in the complete destruction of the human species. The message ended. The screen went dark. Carter stood in silence for a long moment. Around him, his crew waited for orders. He could see the fear in their eyes. The Vorath Empire had ruled the galaxy for 40,000 years. They commanded fleets of thousands of warships. They had conquered and destroyed countless civilizations. Against such power, humanity was nothing. But Carter did not feel fear. He felt something else, something that surprised him. He felt calm. The United Earth Council convened in Geneva within hours. Representatives from every human colony gathered in the Great Chamber, their faces projected on screens that lined the walls. The mood was tense. Some called for immediate surrender. Others demanded military action. Most simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process what was happening. Ambassador Lisa Grant spoke first. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen too many negotiations fail. She argued for diplomacy. Perhaps the Vorath could be reasoned with. Perhaps some compromise could be reached. Humanity had nothing to gain from war and everything to lose. Admiral Kevin Wright disagreed. He was a broad man with a scarred face and hands that had never stopped working since the day he joined the fleet. He said that the Vorath did not negotiate. Their history was clear. Species either submitted completely or were erased from existence. There was no middle ground. Humanity needed to prepare for war even if that war could not be won. The debate continued for hours. Voices rose and fell. Tempers flared and cooled. No consensus emerged. Then Dr. Nathan Cole asked to speak. Cole was not a soldier or a politician. He was a historian. He had spent his entire career studying the civilizations that had risen and fallen across the galaxy. He knew the Vorath better than anyone alive. He had read their records, analyzed their conquests, and mapped the patterns of their empire. He stood before the council and said something that changed everything. The Vorath had never been challenged. In 40,000 years of dominance, no species had ever resisted them successfully. Every conquest followed the same pattern. The Empire issued demands. The target species either surrendered or attempted to fight. Those who surrendered were enslaved. Those who fought were destroyed within days. The Vorath military doctrine was built entirely around overwhelming force, applied quickly and decisively. But this doctrine had a weakness. The Vorath had no experience with prolonged conflict. They had no understanding of what happened when a species refused to break. Their entire civilization was built on the assumption that resistance was futile. And because every species had believed this assumption, it had always proven true. Cole proposed a different approach. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would not launch a desperate attack. Humanity would send a message, a single message designed to plant a seed of doubt in minds that had never known uncertainty. The council debated this proposal. Many thought it was foolish. What could words accomplish against warships? But others saw wisdom in Cole's reasoning. The Vorath expected submission or defiance. They would not know how to respond to something else. In the end, the council voted. The decision was not unanimous, but it was clear. Humanity would send its message. Ambassador Grant composed the text herself. She spent hours choosing each word, weighing its meaning, considering how it would be interpreted by minds utterly alien to her own. When she was finished, she read it aloud to the council. 8 words: "We have studied you. We are ready." Some council members laughed. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Admiral Wright smiled for the first time since the crisis began. The message was transmitted to Vorath Prime, to the throne room of Emperor Zarthax, the Eternal, ruler of 12 species and master of 100,000 worlds. His translators delivered the human words, and the Emperor read them with his own eyes. He laughed. His advisors suggested caution. The humans had sent a strange message. Perhaps they knew something. Perhaps they had some hidden weapon or secret alliance. It might be wise to investigate before committing the fleet. Zarthax dismissed these concerns with a wave of his hand. Humans were children playing at civilization. They had existed for barely a moment in galactic time. They had no weapons that could threaten the Empire. They had no allies who would dare oppose Vorath rule. Their message was nothing but empty words from a doomed species trying to sound brave. He ordered the message deleted from the records. He commanded his admirals to prepare the invasion fleet. The humans would learn the cost of defiance. Their worlds would burn. Their people would be scattered across the stars as slaves. Their name would be forgotten. The Emperor returned to his throne and thought no more of Earth or its message. Across the galaxy, Commander Daniel Carter watched the stars from his observation deck. He knew the Emperor's response, even before the intelligence reports confirmed it. He had expected nothing less. The Vorath had ignored the warning, and in doing so, they had sealed their fate. Humanity began to prepare. Not with panic, not with desperation, but with the quiet determination of a species that had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly destroyed them. They had faced extinction before. They knew how to endure. The countdown had begun. The Vorath Empire moved with the confidence of a giant that had never stumbled. Across their vast territory, shipyards roared to life. Weapons were loaded. Soldiers were assembled. 3,000 warships gathered at the staging point near the border of human space. It was the largest fleet deployed in centuries, though the Vorath considered it barely necessary. Crushing humanity would be like stepping on an insect. While the Empire prepared for easy victory, humanity prepared for something else entirely. General Amy Collins stood in the war room beneath the mountains of Colorado. Screens surrounded her, each one showing a different sector of human space. She was a small woman with short brown hair and eyes that never seemed to rest. She had commanded troops on 3 different worlds, and she had never lost a battle she was allowed to fight properly. Now she faced the greatest challenge of her career. She was not afraid. She was focused. Dr. Nathan Cole arrived with his analysis of Vorath military doctrine. He had spent weeks compiling every piece of information humanity had gathered about their enemy. Trade records, diplomatic exchanges, intercepted communications, ancient histories from conquered species. He spread the data across the table and began to explain. The Vorath fought in a specific way. Their fleets moved in rigid formations. Every ship had an assigned position. Every captain followed orders from above without question. Commands flowed from the Emperor to his admirals to their captains in a chain that never broke. This system had served them well for millennia because their enemies always fought the same way. 2 fleets would meet, exchange fire, and the larger force would win. Simple, predictable, effective. But humans did not have to fight that way. Collins listened carefully. She asked questions. She challenged assumptions. When Cole finished, she nodded slowly and said 3 words that would define the war to come. We fight differently. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Brooks received his orders on a rainy night in Seattle. He was a quiet man with forgettable features, which made him perfect for his job. He led a team of intelligence operatives, specialists in moving unseen through hostile territory. His mission was simple but dangerous. He would take his team into Vorath space, not to sabotage or assassinate, but to watch. Humanity needed to understand how the enemy moved, how they communicated, how they thought. Books and records could only reveal so much. Real intelligence required real observation. Brooks and his team departed in a small ship designed to look like a merchant vessel. They carried no weapons that could be traced to Earth. If they were caught, they would be alone. No rescue would come. No government would acknowledge them. They accepted this without complaint. Some things mattered more than survival. On Earth, engineer Michelle Davis worked in a laboratory that officially did not exist. She was young for her position, barely 30 years old. But her mind worked in ways that older engineers could not match. She saw patterns where others saw chaos. She found solutions that seemed impossible until she explained them. Her project was called Prometheus, though it was not a weapon in any traditional sense. It was a network. A system that would allow human ships to operate without central command. Every vessel would think for itself. Every captain would make independent decisions based on shared information. The fleet would move like a living organism, adapting to threats in real time. This was the opposite of Vorath doctrine. Where they relied on hierarchy, humans would rely on flexibility. Where they demanded obedience, humans would encourage initiative. It was a gamble. A fleet without central command could fall into chaos. Ships might work against each other. Strategies might collapse. But Davis believed in her system. She believed in human creativity and human adaptability. She believed that given the freedom to think, her people would find ways to win that no predetermined plan could match. Admiral Kevin Wright reviewed the fleet readiness reports each morning. 400 warships. That was all humanity could muster against the Vorath armada. By any reasonable calculation, it was not enough. The enemy outnumbered them nearly 8-1. Vorath ships were larger, better armed, protected by shields that human weapons could barely penetrate. Wright did not care about reasonable calculations. He gathered his captains and spoke to them plainly. He told them that they would not fight a traditional battle. They would not form lines and exchange fire until one side broke. That kind of war would kill them all in hours. Instead, they would scatter. They would run. They would hide in asteroid fields and dust clouds and debris fields. They would strike from shadows and vanish before the enemy could respond. They would be ghosts that the Vorath could never catch and never predict. Some captains questioned this approach. It seemed cowardly. It seemed like running away. Wright listened to their concerns and then asked a simple question. Do you want to die with honor or live with victory? No one questioned him again. Lieutenant Commander Brooks sent his first report from deep inside Vorath territory. The enemy fleet was impressive, but flawed. Their ships maintained constant communication with command stations. If those communications were disrupted, individual captains had no protocols for independent action. They would wait for orders that never came. The information was distributed to every human commander. Each one began developing tactics to exploit this weakness. Ambassador Lisa Grant pursued a different kind of warfare. She traveled in secret to worlds that the Vorath had conquered centuries ago. The Keth, a reptilian species whose empire had fallen to the Vorath before humanity discovered fire. The Morvani, who existed as slave labor in the mines of a dozen worlds. The Telex, whose history and culture had been erased so completely that few even remembered their name. She offered them nothing but truth. She showed them recordings of the Vorath ultimatum. She showed them humanity's response. She told them that Earth would fight, and that Earth intended to win. Most did not believe her. The Vorath were invincible. Everyone knew this. Resistance was impossible, but some listened. Some remembered what their ancestors had been before the conquest. Some felt the spark of something they had been taught to suppress, hope. Grant planted seeds wherever she went. She did not know if they would grow. She only knew that humanity would need allies before the end. The 30 days passed like a held breath. On the final day, Commander Daniel Carter stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the Vorath fleet emerge from hyperspace. 3,000 warships arranged in perfect formation, the largest military force he had ever seen. The enemy commander sent a final demand for surrender. Carter did not bother responding. The first battle of the Human-Vorath War was about to begin. Vorath Commander Thex had conquered 11 species in his career. He had burned worlds and shattered fleets, and never known defeat. When he received orders to crush the human rebellion, he considered it beneath his dignity. Humans were primitives who had barely learned to travel between stars. They deserved a junior officer, not a warrior of his standing. But the Emperor had commanded, and Thex obeyed. His fleet entered human space at Kepler Station, a mining outpost on the edge of the disputed belt. 3,000 warships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. Their weapons charged, their shields raised. Scanners detected the human defense force immediately. 400 ships. Thex almost laughed. The humans had sent barely a tenth of his numbers to defend their territory. He had expected cowardice, but this was absurdity. Did they truly believe they could stop him with such a pitiful force? He ordered his fleet forward. Standard conquest formation. Overwhelming advance followed by systematic destruction. The battle would be over within the hour. Admiral Kevin Wright watched the Vorath approach on his tactical display. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by officers who trusted him with their lives. None of them spoke, none of them needed to. They knew the plan. Wright waited until the enemy was fully committed to their advance. Then he gave a single command: scatter. The human fleet exploded outward in every direction. Ships broke formation and fled toward the asteroid fields that surrounded the station. From the Vorath perspective, it looked like panic. It looked like the humans had seen the size of the enemy fleet and lost their nerve. Commander Thex smiled. He had seen this before. Primitive species often broke and ran when they faced true power. It changed nothing. His ships would hunt them down one by one. He ordered pursuit. This was his first mistake. The Vorath fleet split into hunting groups, each chasing a cluster of fleeing human vessels. Their perfect formation dissolved as faster ships raced ahead of slower ones. Communication became difficult as the fleet spread across thousands of kilometers. Captain Katie Nash of the destroyer Relentless led her pursuers into an asteroid field she knew better than her own home. Her ship was small and fast, designed for exactly this kind of terrain. The 3 Vorath cruisers following her were not. She wove between spinning rocks, using their mass to block enemy sensors. The cruisers tried to follow, but could not match her maneuvers. One clipped an asteroid and lost its shields. Nash spun her ship around and fired everything she had into the wounded vessel. It exploded in a flash of light that temporarily blinded the other 2 cruisers. By the time their sensors cleared, she was gone. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human ships led their pursuers into traps. Asteroid fields seeded with mines, debris clouds hiding weapon platforms, kill zones where multiple human vessels could concentrate fire on isolated enemies. Lieutenant Chris Palmer flew a fighter so damaged it could barely maintain thrust. His squadron had been ambushed by a Vorath patrol, and he was the only survivor. His weapons were depleted. His shields were gone. His life support was failing. He should have retreated. Any reasonable pilot would have fled toward friendly lines. Palmer was not feeling reasonable. He spotted a Vorath command ship coordinating the pursuit in his sector. The vessel was massive, bristling with weapons, protected by escorts. It was directing the movements of 50 warships. Palmer aimed his broken fighter at its communication array and pushed his engines to maximum. The Vorath did not consider him a threat. He was one small ship, clearly damaged, obviously doomed. They did not even bother shooting at him. Palmer crashed into the communication array at full speed. The impact destroyed his fighter and killed him instantly. It also severed the command ship's ability to coordinate its fleet. 50 Vorath warships suddenly lost contact with their commanders. They had no protocols for this situation. Their doctrine demanded that they wait for orders. So they waited, drifting in space, while human ships picked them off one by one. Commander Thex realized his mistake too late. His fleet was scattered across the system, cut off from effective communication, fighting dozens of small battles instead of one large one. He tried to regroup, but the humans refused to let him. Every time he gathered a force, human ships would strike from unexpected angles and scatter his vessels again. Every time he established a defensive position, attacks from multiple directions would force him to move. He had never experienced anything like this. The humans fought without honor. They refused to face him directly. They used tricks and traps and tactics that no civilized species would employ, and they were winning. The battle lasted 18 hours. Thex watched his fleet shrink with every passing minute. Ships that had conquered worlds were destroyed by vessels a fraction of their size. Warriors who had never known defeat died in the cold darkness of space. When he finally ordered retreat, he had lost over 1,000 warships. 1/3 of his force destroyed by an enemy that should have fallen in minutes. Admiral Wright did not pursue. He gathered his surviving ships and assessed the damage. Humanity had lost 60 vessels. Painful, but sustainable. The Vorath had lost more than 16 times that number. It was the first defeat the Empire had suffered in 8,000 years. The news spread faster than light. Across Vorath space, subjects who had lived in hopeless submission heard whispers of the impossible. The masters could be beaten. The invincible were not invincible. On Vorath Prime, Emperor Zarthax received Commander Thex's report in stunned silence. His advisors spoke of tactical errors and unexpected human capabilities. They recommended careful analysis before the next engagement. The Emperor heard none of it. He saw only failure. He saw only humiliation. He saw a primitive species daring to resist the greatest power the galaxy had ever known. He stripped Thex of command and sentenced him to death. He ordered the construction of a new fleet, larger than any assembled in 3,000 years. He declared that he would lead this fleet personally. The humans had won a battle. He would make them lose everything. 15,000 ships would descend on human space. The Emperor himself would watch their worlds burn. But even as he made these plans, he did not understand what had truly happened at Kepler Station. He did not understand that humanity had not just won a battle. They had changed the rules of the game entirely, and across the galaxy, others were beginning to notice. Emperor Zarthax stood in the great shipyard of Vorath Prime and watched his armada take shape. 15,000 warships, each one larger and more powerful than anything humanity could build. Dreadnoughts that could crack planets. Carriers that held thousands of fighters. Battle cruisers armed with weapons that could tear holes in reality itself. This was not a fleet. This was extinction made manifest. The Emperor had not left his throne world in centuries. He had not needed to. His commands shaped the galaxy without his physical presence. But the humans had embarrassed him. They had made him look weak before his subjects. For that crime, he would watch their destruction with his own eyes. What he did not see were the cracks forming in his empire. Ambassador Lisa Grant had worked for months in the shadows. She had visited a dozen conquered worlds, speaking to leaders who had surrendered their people generations ago. Most had rejected her message. They were too afraid, too broken, too convinced that resistance meant death. But some had listened. On the mining world of Keth Prime, a foreman named Grath organized his workers in secret. They had built Vorath ships for 800 years. They knew every weakness in their construction. They knew which systems failed under stress, and which components could be sabotaged without detection. Grath did not believe the humans would win. He had lived too long under Vorath rule to believe in miracles, but he had watched the recordings from Kepler Station. He had seen Vorath ships burn, and for the first time in his life, he wondered if death fighting was better than death serving. He gave his workers a choice. Most chose to act. Across the Empire, similar decisions were being made. The Morvani who processed fuel for Vorath ships began introducing impurities that would cause engine failures. The Telex who managed communication networks started creating delays and disruptions. Small acts of defiance, invisible individually, but devastating in combination. Dr. Nathan Cole had predicted this. He had studied every rebellion in galactic history, every insurgency that had risen against impossible odds. Most had failed, but those that succeeded shared a common element. They had hope. Kepler Station had given the galaxy hope. Not certainty, not confidence, but the simple belief that the future might be different from the past. That was enough. General Amy Collins coordinated humanity's preparations for the coming assault. She knew the Emperor was gathering a force that dwarfed anything humanity could match. She knew that another scattered battle would not work against such overwhelming numbers. She also knew they would not fight alone. Grant's diplomacy had borne fruit. The Keth had secretly constructed a small fleet of their own, hidden in the asteroid belts of their system. The Morvani had stolen weapons from the very ships they built. The Telex had preserved records of Vorath vulnerabilities that their masters thought destroyed. These contributions were small compared to the Imperial Armada, but they represented something far more important than firepower. They represented unity. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Brooks sent his final report from Vorath space just before the invasion began. The Emperor's fleet had encountered unexpected delays. Ships malfunctioned for reasons engineers could not explain. Supplies arrived late, or not at all. Communication channels experienced interference at critical moments. The rebellion was not dramatic. There were no great battles, no heroic uprisings. Just 1,000 small failures that slowed the machinery of empire. It bought humanity time. Not much, but enough. The Imperial Armada entered human space 3 months behind schedule. 15,000 ships emerged from hyperspace, but they were not the perfect force the Emperor had envisioned. Many had mechanical problems. Some had crews that were exhausted from dealing with constant malfunctions. All had traveled through territory that no longer felt entirely safe. Emperor Zarthax ignored these concerns. He had brought enough power to destroy humanity 10 times over. Minor inconveniences would not change the outcome. He advanced toward Earth itself. He wanted to burn humanity's homeworld first, to make an example that the galaxy would never forget. Admiral Kevin Wright waited in the Sol system with every ship humanity could gather. He had studied the Vorath for months. He understood their tactics, their psychology, their weaknesses, but understanding an enemy and defeating an enemy were different things. 8,000 ships stood between the Emperor and Earth. Humanity had built more vessels in the months since Kepler Station, but they were still outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. And this time, the enemy knew their tactics. The Vorath would not chase them into traps. They would advance slowly, methodically, crushing everything in their path. Wright had one advantage left. One secret that he had kept, even from his own officers. When the Emperor's fleet reached the outer edge of the Sol system, they found the human defense force waiting. Admiral Wright's ships held position near the orbit of Neptune, arranged in a formation that invited direct assault. Zarthax smiled. The humans had learned nothing. They were offering a traditional battle, the kind the Vorath always won. He ordered his fleet forward. Then the other ships appeared, from behind Neptune's moons, from the ice fields of the outer system, from hiding places that Vorath scanners had not detected. Vessels emerged to join the human fleet. Keth warships, ancient, but still deadly. Morvani assault craft, built in secret over decades. Telex destroyers, crewed by survivors who had waited generations for this moment. More ships arrived. Species that had submitted to the Vorath without firing a shot now chose to fight. Civilizations that had been conquered before humanity existed now rose to stand beside them. The Allied fleet was still outnumbered, but not by as much as before, and they carried something the Vorath had never faced, the will of a galaxy that had finally had enough. Emperor Zarthax stared at his tactical display in disbelief. This was impossible. These species had been broken. They had been conquered. They belonged to him. His advisors urged retreat. The situation had changed. The Empire needed to regroup, to crush these rebellions before facing humanity again. The Emperor refused. He would not run from slaves and primitives. He would destroy them all and restore order through fire. He ordered his fleet to attack. The final battle for Earth had begun. The Battle of Sol began in silence. Thousands of ships faced each other across the void. Weapons charged, shields raised, crews holding their breath. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, nothing moved. Then Emperor Zarthax gave the order, and the galaxy changed forever. The Imperial Armada advanced in perfect formation, a wall of warships that stretched across millions of kilometers. Vorath doctrine demanded overwhelming force applied directly. Crush the enemy. Accept no surrender. Leave no survivors. Admiral Kevin Wright watched them come. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by officers from a dozen different species. Keth navigators plotted coordinates. Morvani weapons officers checked targeting systems. Telex communication specialists monitored enemy signals. It was the strangest command crew in history. It was also the most determined. Wright gave his orders through the distributed network that Michelle Davis had built. Every ship received the same information simultaneously. Every captain understood the overall strategy while retaining freedom to adapt. The fleet moved not as a hierarchy following commands, but as a living organism responding to threats. The two forces met at the orbit of Saturn. The first hours were chaos. Vorath warships pounded the Allied lines with weapons that could crack moons. Allied vessels scattered and regrouped, striking at weak points before vanishing into the debris of destroyed ships. The rings of Saturn became a graveyard of burning metal. Commander Daniel Carter led his squadron through the heart of the battle. His ship was small compared to the Vorath dreadnoughts, but speed and maneuverability counted for more than size in close combat. He wove between enemy vessels, targeting their communication arrays and sensor clusters, blinding them for the larger Allied ships to finish. Captain Katie Nash fought beside him. Her destroyer, Relentless, had survived Kepler Station and a dozen engagements since. Its hull was scarred with wounds that had never fully healed. Its crew had shrunk as casualties mounted. But it still flew, and it still fought. She targeted a Vorath carrier that was launching fighters toward the Allied rear. Her weapons carved through its launch bays, trapping hundreds of enemy craft inside. The carrier exploded when its fuel reserves ignited, taking its entire complement with it. The battle swung back and forth. Allied ships fell by the hundreds, but Vorath vessels fell too. The Emperor had expected quick victory. Instead, he found himself locked in a grinding war of attrition that favored neither side. Grath, the Keth foreman who had organized the sabotage months before, now commanded a ship of his own. It was an old vessel, outdated by centuries, but it flew true. He drove it into a formation of Vorath cruisers and released a weapon his people had kept hidden for generations, a device that disrupted the shields of any ship within range. The cruisers became vulnerable. Allied weapons that had bounced off their defenses now tore through their hulls. Grath did not survive the counterattack, but his sacrifice opened a hole in the Vorath lines that would never close. 40 hours into the battle, both fleets had lost thousands of ships. The space around Saturn was thick with wreckage and bodies. Neither side had gained clear advantage. Neither side was willing to retreat. Emperor Zarthax grew impatient. He had never fought a battle that lasted more than a few hours. He had never faced an enemy that simply refused to die. Every tactical instinct told him that the primitives should have broken by now. They had not. He ordered his flagship to advance into the heart of the battle. If his fleet could not destroy the humans, he would do it himself. He would show them what true power looked like. This was his final mistake. Commander Carter saw the Emperor's flagship push forward. It was the largest ship in either fleet, bristling with weapons that could devastate worlds. But it was also isolated. The Emperor's impatience had carried him ahead of his escort. Carter gathered every available ship: human destroyers, Keth cruisers, Morvani assault craft, Telex gunships. Vessels from 7 different species formed up around him, their crews united by a single purpose. They struck the Emperor's flagship from every direction at once. The Imperial vessel fought back with terrible fury. Its weapons swept space clean of attackers. Its shields absorbed punishment that would have destroyed a dozen lesser ships. But the Allied force did not stop. Every time a ship fell, another took its place. Every time the flagship's weapons found a target, 10 more appeared. Carter led the final assault himself. His ship punched through a gap in the flagship's shields and crashed into its hull. The impact killed half his crew, but the survivors poured into the Vorath vessel, fighting through corridors that stank of blood and smoke. They found the Emperor on his command deck, surrounded by his personal guard. Zarthax stood taller than any human, his gray skin gleaming under emergency lights. He watched the intruders approach with an expression that mixed rage and disbelief. Carter faced him across a floor littered with bodies. The Emperor demanded an explanation. How had this happened? How had primitives and slaves brought down an empire that had stood for 40,000 years? What weapon had they used? What secret technology, what power had they discovered? Carter's answer was simple. You ignored the message. The Emperor did not understand. He could not understand. His entire existence was built on the belief that strength guaranteed victory, that conquest was the natural order, that resistance was always futile. The concept that beings weaker than himself might simply refuse to accept defeat was beyond his comprehension. Carter did not try to explain further. Some lessons could not be taught. They had to be experienced. The Emperor fell. His guards fell with him. The flagship's command systems went dark. Across the battlefield, Vorath ships received the news that their god king was dead. Some continued fighting out of rage or desperation. Others surrendered. Many simply stopped, their crews paralyzed by a reality they had never imagined possible. The Battle of Saul ended not with a dramatic final confrontation, but with a slow unwinding as the Imperial fleet came apart. Ships that had fought with fanatical determination moments before now drifted aimlessly. The rigid hierarchy that had held them together had been destroyed, and they had nothing to replace it. Admiral Wright accepted surrender from the surviving Vorath commanders. He offered terms that were harsh but not cruel. The empire was over, but its people would survive. In the months that followed, Ambassador Lisa Grant worked to build something new from the wreckage of the old. The Soul Compact, she called it. An alliance not of conquest but cooperation. Species that had been enemies for millennia now sat at the same table, working toward a shared future. Dr. Nathan Cole recorded everything for posterity. He noted that humanity's greatest weapon had never been technology or tactics. It had been the simple refusal to accept that defeat was inevitable, the belief that tomorrow could be different from yesterday. The Vorath had built their empire on fear. They had assumed that all species would submit, because all species had always submitted. They never considered that some might choose to fight regardless of the odds, regardless of the cost, regardless of what logic and reason dictated. Commander Daniel Carter retired to a small house overlooking the Pacific Ocean. He had seen enough of war. He had lost too many friends. He wanted only to watch the waves and remember those who had not lived to see the victory. Sometimes, late at night, he thought about the message that Earth had sent. 8 words that had changed everything. We have studied you. We are ready. The Vorath had laughed at those words. They had ignored them completely. And now their empire was dust. Their emperor was dead, and the galaxy was free for the first time in 40,000 years. Earth had sent a single message. Ignoring it had been the Empire's doom.